welcome. You know that feeling? No, you don't. But just in a second, you will find out. There you go. This doesn't work. Sorry. So, you know that feeling when someone decides that they need your test equipment more than you do, right? Or that feeling when you're never asked or informed about the changes in the product. I see. Or that feeling when the test data you spent hours creating is deleted. Or you know that feeling when the build takes forever? I like this one. You know that feeling when the test environment is messing with you again, like for the 100th time? I especially like this one. The feeling when people keep interrupting you in your test session. So, what does this have to do with visualizing testability? If you stick around, you will find out. All of these situations, hands up if you recognize at least one of them. Right. So, during my 15 years in software development, I've experienced all of these situations, either as a software tester or observing and listening to very, very upset testers in my role as a test manager. So today, I want to share an experience report with you. I will share some insights on how I increased my own and others' awareness of testability. There are some main takeaways from this talk. I've got two things that I want to highlight for you. The first one is, why is testability important? And the second one is actually how visualizing testability can help. So, I remember I was sitting at my desk, I was reading some emails, and I could see Anna in the corner of my eye. She was walking towards me with this really quick and firm steps. And this was an open landscape, so I could actually see from miles how upset she was. And she was heading towards me. I knew this because this was not the first time. She approached me and, Maria, I'm so angry. I've been asking for something to test for days now. The developer keeps telling me, just wait, you'll get it. But I never get anything and I don't know what to do anymore. Let's say we continued this discussion behind closed doors. A couple of days later, I was sitting at my desk again doing these management things, and I felt this pat on my shoulder. This time it was George and Linda, also two testers in my team. They were slightly more contained than Anna, and they were more whispering when they asked me, Maria, do you have a minute? But behind closed doors, they let everything go. The product is so buggy, and it keeps changing all the time. And every time we get a new fix, there's a new bug. And we have no idea if we're going to be able to deliver in time. The developers don't seem to care. We don't know what to do. So these were only two of the things that were going on at this time in my company. In addition to this, we were actually recruiting more people, and I was recruiting more testers as well. I didn't really have the time to support everyone because we had so many things to do. In addition, we did have this organizational change. It affected everyone, especially the testers. And this was due to some problems that we had before, and these problems actually got worse due to the organizational change. There was information that we had difficulties to retrieve, and the organizational change kind of confused people. They got confused in which responsibilities they had and which roles they had, and that actually made it more difficult for us to get the information that we needed from stakeholders or from different product owners. Let's not forget, we also had a test environment. I think everyone here has experienced some problems with the test environment. We used to have a downtime period every month, about 1 to 2 hours, and it was because we needed more test data for our test environment. We needed new test data. And this was supposed to take 1 to 2 hours. Normally, it took maybe 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. And you can kind of make the math yourself. You can take my 20 testers and take that times these 1, 2, 3 days. That was a lot of waste of time. I mean, I might be exaggerating here, but the point is we had low cost, or low testability can be very costly in this sense if you compare that to what happened with the test environment. And my testers were also really mentally exhausted by all these problems. Sometimes we were even blamed for being very slow in testing. Sometimes maybe that was true, but most of the times it was due to problems that we had. And we had testability issues. So it was only recently that I had discovered testability. It was something I had become interested in. And I had discovered Heuristics of Testability by James Bach. And this model really got me hooked. James describes testability as how easily a product can be tested. What I really liked about this model is that it seemed to have a depth. It's like an iceberg, like one of those things that seems like very easy on the surface. I mean, it's about testability. How hard can that be? But when you start to think about what affects testability, the things that affect how easily a product can be tested, that's when you get the idea of the magnitude that kind of lies underneath the iceberg. So James describes testability as a function of 5 other testabilities. I will go through this model very briefly. If you're more interested, you could find it on his website. So the first testability is the project-related testability. This is testability that's influenced by changing the conditions under which we test. So if we look at my first example with Anna, and the troubles that she had in getting the build to be able to test. This is a typical example of project-related testability. And for her, this one was very low. If we look at the second one here, subjective testability, that's about me as a tester, about the knowledge I have about testing the product, about skills I have. Then we have intrinsic testability, which is about the product itself. So by changing the product to make it more testable is something that's part of intrinsic testability. So if we take the example of George and Linda, where they had a very buggy or unstable product, this is actually two different parts of this model, which is project-related testability and intrinsic testability. So project-related testability because of the frequency that they got a new build, and intrinsic testability because of the bugginess and how unstable it was. Then we have the fourth one, which is value-related testability. And you can change this one by getting to know, for example, the people that are going to use your software. And the last one is epistemic testability, which is about the gap between what you know and what you need to know. So now we get to the things that I really find interesting, which is if you think about the dynamics of this. Thank you. So if we take Anna's example again, where she had problems with the project-related testability, and that if we wanted to increase that part, it might actually mean that we might decrease the intrinsic testability because the product or the software might become a bit more unstable if we turned up the frequency of the delivery. So actually, increasing testability in one area might actually decrease it in another one. And if we go back to the definition of testability, how easily a product can be tested, it was very, very difficult for my testers to do their work during this time. And naturally, I wanted to help. I mean, if someone has a problem, you want to help them out. So I thought by increasing my testers' awareness of testability, I would help them to find a structure in their chaotic day-to-day life. So every year, I used to set a mission for my testing team. It could be something that we would work on during the entire year. For example, getting better at test reporting. And 2014 was the year of testability. I was extremely excited to share my new passion. And we started off with a workshop where the aim was to get a common understanding of testability. So I had designed this exercise, a kind of simulation where they would experience the different things that affects testability. But I also wanted them to visualize the things that affected them in their context and in their day-to-day life. So I introduced them to my 3 questions. I wanted them to answer these questions by 3 answers for each question. And the first question is, what can I do? What can I do as a software tester to increase testability? One of the testers identified that if he actually studied responsive web design a bit more, that would help him when he was testing his web application. Another tester, this was actually Anna, she identified that by learning SQL, she would be able to write her own queries to retrieve the data that she needed to test. And that would make her independent of the developers, because normally she used to ask the developers to help her produce these queries for her. So these are things that my testers could take responsibility for. They could take control, well, at least some control over these things. The second question I asked my testers was, what can I, or I asked them to ask themselves, what can I ask of others to increase testability? And these were actually things that they asked the people the closest around them, because they were working in development teams, so they would ask their developers for help, or their product owners, or other stakeholders. And George, actually in this case, he identified that if he could get better logging for the application that he was testing, he might be able to to troubleshoot the application easier when problems arose. And this was something that he could actually ask the developers for help. The third one, those are things that are actually beyond my ability to affect. Me as a tester, those were actually things that my testers gave to me as a manager, so I put them in my management backlog. And the unavailability of the test environment was one of those things. So that was an issue that I tried to help to sort out, so that the test environment would be more available to my testers. Another thing was the responsibility and expectations on software testing now that the organization was changing. So those were the type of things that I had in my backlog. I quite soon realized that it wasn't enough to just involve the software testers. I actually needed more people to be aware of testability to succeed, because a high degree of testability actually helps everyone, not only the testers, but it helps everyone involved in software development. And everyone can contribute to increase it as well. So my husband was actually working at the same company during this time, and of course I discussed testability a lot with him. Those were the things that we discussed during dinner. He actually identified a testability issue when he was watching one of the testers testing, and he noticed that she was doing all these unnecessary steps to get to the state of the product that she needed to test. She had actually no idea that those were unnecessary until he pointed it out by asking her, why do you do this? Do you really need to go through this configuration or setup? And she was like, yes, I do this every time I test. And he looked quite surprised because he thought that was unnecessary, and asked her, but what if I made this tool for you so that you could get into the state of the product immediately instead? Would that help you? And she was so surprised that he could actually do that for her. So that's an example of how everyone can actually contribute to a higher degree of testability. In addition, some of the teams at my organization was actually begging for more testers. Yes, we were hiring at the time, but I didn't really have the budget needed for it. So I actually believed by increasing testability in some of these teams would maybe help them to do their own testing, or perhaps they could wait for their testers, at least until some of the problems were sorted out. So I really needed to have management and the teams on board. And what I wanted to do was to put testability on the software development roadmap, not only the testers' roadmap. So yeah, this is the cheeky reflecting picture, but I actually do enjoy sitting by the sea and think of the things that I would like to improve, or things that I've experienced. So how did it go? Did I succeed in bringing awareness to testability? I would say that the simple answer is yes. I mean, the testers became aware of testability, right? We even discussed it and made internal jokes, and at one point I think it kind of inflated, like every single small problem was a testability issue. Like not having the right candy when we were doing some testing activities. So yeah, they got aware of testability. I think the question is, how deeply aware did they get? I think we only scratched the surface of the iceberg, because we didn't really have the time needed to understand the dimensions of testability. I also wonder if I actually did help my testers. I do think I helped them to become more conscious, to think consciously about testability. The heuristics of testability model did help them to visualize some of the things that actually affected them during their working. And the feedback I actually got on the model was that it was a little bit too abstract and sometimes difficult to understand. I think that might depend on the time that we didn't have to actually get deeper into it. But what really did help my testers was the 3 questions that I asked them. By asking, what can I do as a software tester, the tester could take responsibility for some things that they could actually change. And then also, by giving me some of the things that they really couldn't affect, could make them put those aside and not focus on them anymore. So, to be able to know if I actually reached my goals, to bring awareness to testability and to increase perhaps testability, I needed some way to evaluate my goals, some kind of way to measure them. And at first, maybe very naively, but first I thought I could measure testability by how frustrated my testers were. I mean, there seemed to be a correlation between frustration and low testability. But if you look at the opposite, I mean, non-frustrated testers, does that really mean that we got high testability? It's a lot more complicated than that. So testability is affected by a lot of different parameters. So did I increase testability? In general, I would actually say no. But if we look into specific testability issues, I would say that we managed to increase the testability in these very specific ones. For example, George actually did get the log that he needed. So in that case, he increased, or the testability was increased for him in this specific issue. I was left with a lot of questions. I mean, there were so many things that I didn't have an answer to, and I thought that I could search the internet and I would find a lot more answers. So I did do a search on the internet to see if there was anything more that I could find on testability. And there are things that both James Bach and Michael Bolton have written about, specifically on this perspective, this holistic view of testability. But most of the things I found is more about intrinsic testability, or the software quality characteristic testability, about the product itself and how you can change that. To me, that's a part of this holistic perspective. So I felt that something was missing, and I really wanted to share all my new insights with everyone. So when Let's Test actually had its call for proposal, I asked Ben Kelly, a good friend of mine and a peer, if he wanted to make a workshop with me. This was because I think my work actually thrives better from discussing it and arguing it and debating it. So I didn't want to do this workshop alone. And we did have a lot of discussions. We still don't agree on everything that we have come up with. But at one point, Ben suggested that we came up with our own model. I was very, very reluctant at first because I liked heuristics of testability, and I had studied it. But the model that we came up with kind of affects, the model that we came up with reflects our own experiences from software development and makes it a lot easier for us to discuss testability. So this is the model that we came up with. This is not a model of testability, it's a model of what affects testability. And it's an onion diagram, as you can see. It has three main elements. We've got the tester as one of them, we got the product as a second, and then we have the context drivers. And in our model, the tester is the one I think that we've discussed the most, the one that was the most easy to agree upon. And we have the tester as someone who is performing testing. So this is seen as in a broader sense, meaning that skills and knowledge is essential to this diagram. So you need specific testing skills and you need specific knowledge to be able to test. But also we wanted to tie physical and mental state in this part of the diagram, since I guess everyone has experienced that you're not focused enough. Maybe you're jet lagged, or maybe you stayed up really late yesterday and had discussions. And so we wanted to tie that really, really tight to the model. The second one is product. And this one is the one we've discussed it, but we don't agree completely on this part. For example, we have team as a part of the product. This is something that we do not really agree upon yet. So the discussion is whether this is part of the product diagram or if it's part of the context drivers. And for the context drivers, we've got 4 different areas, which is the risks, we've got resources, we got relationships, and development paradigm. So this model has come up from a lot of different discussions, and we also have had 2 workshops so far, where we got a lot of feedback and a lot of discussions around this model. So we've tried to enter this, and this is the first version that we have. It's work under progress, and I think actually we have achieved the main goal for this, which is to bring awareness to testability. So, I've actually reached to the wrap-up time, leaving perhaps a lot more time for you to come up with questions. But today, I wanted to share some insights and how I increased awareness of testability. I had 2 main points that I wanted to highlight. And the first one is why testability is important. And I think, in my experience, that testability affects everyone in software development. It also affects cost. And in my experience, low testability is costly and mentally exhausting. The second highlight that I had was how visualizing testability can help you. And I believe that visualizing testability can make it easier for you to understand what actually affects how easily a product can be tested. So it can help you help you in your testing. And I've shown you 3 different models here on how to actually visualize what affects testability. And the first one is Heuristics of Testability. The second one is my 3 questions. And then we have dimensions of testability. And I actually believe that we can all bring testing forward by becoming aware of testability. And I'd like to end this presentation actually by asking you to take the time and ask yourself, what can I do to increase testability? And when you figure that out, tweet it and tag it with Testability and CAST 2015. Thank you very much. We have some time left for questions.
Hey, to start with, it was a really good experience report, and it was really good experience report, and it was useful. I just had a question regarding the dimensions which you showed, and have you applied either the heuristic model of James Bach or your dimensions of testability model on a project or a team to see whether that makes sense in the context of your project in terms of testability? That's first part. Second part is, have you seen any improvements in testability by applying these heuristic models on your team? I just wanted to know based on your experience.
Okay. So if I try to repeat that question, have I applied any of these models in reality and seen if I could have improved?
Yeah, because I'm interested in the results. And second thing, yeah, pretty much that's the question. So yeah.
Yes. The first model, the heuristics of testability, I would say I did try to apply some of it. I did notice quite soon that it was too much to grasp, which is why I tried to narrow it down to something very much more practical in my sense of view for the 3 questions. So we did work with the 3 questions. So each tester had 3 things that they came up with, and that was their goal to try to work on during that specific year. It was nothing bonus related or anything, but it was something they identified so they could take responsibility for it. And I tried to help them as much as possible to achieve those ones, either if it was that they needed education or time or whatever it was. So both yes and no. We did achieve a few results by these questions. The model was more to visualize all the things that actually affects testability. It's so many different things that affects it that it could be difficult sometimes to understand exactly what it is.
Okay, so you got some results, but you didn't get complete results to see whether it was working or not, kind of, right? Okay.
Yes, that's correct. I actually started this, I think, in February 2014, and in November I left the company. So maybe, okay. I don't know, if I had more time, maybe I might have seen more results, but I did leave the company. Yeah.
Yeah, because the only reason I was saying this was for beginning testers who are beginners, and all of a sudden we show a model like this, they get confused. So I just want to see how you handle that. But that answered my question. So.
Okay, we're looking for 032, and then 127 is on deck.
Hello, and just in my background, one organization in particular, we made extensive use of snapshots to do setup, because you just had the one slide with the person saying, I just spent 2 hours. And I really fell in love with that concept because it just made testing so much faster. But a lot of other organizations I've worked at, they're adamantly opposed to any sort of snapshot. They want their test data created from scratch each and every time. And I was wondering what your thoughts on that were.
We actually did make snapshots as well. I'm not sure, but they didn't really get it to work during the time I was there. There were a lot of different things going on, both maybe perhaps politically, but there were so many things to try and solve that that wasn't the highest priority at that time. There were other things that were more prioritized than the test environment, basically.
Well, they didn't try and have like a snapshot that would solve everything, but there would be this complete subset of tests that might take an hour or 2 to run. They'd snapshot it, run those tests, set up for the next set of tests and run them. And maybe it's just because they had taken the time to appropriately set up the snapshots, and there was no political opposition to it. Everybody was in favor of it because they said, man, this is saving us hours of setup. So all we have to do is run our tests. We don't have to continually reset up.
Yeah.
Thank you. And 127, was that?
He's over here.
Ah.
Real quick. So my question was already asked by the first. I wanted to know how you applied the model, but I did also want to say it's incredibly daunting sometimes to bring a new model to the community, so I want to applaud you for that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, and we do have a question via Twitter, and Alex is going to take that.
All right. It says, testers with programming skills, do you feel more should use them for increasing testability than writing auto checks?
Could you repeat that, please?
Testers with programming skills, do you feel more should use them for increasing testability than writing auto checks?
I'm not really sure I understand the question. If
I guess increasing testability, using their programming skills to increase testability, or basically write automation. That's what how I would interpret it.
I don't know how to answer that question, really. I'm sorry.
A yellow card. Oh, okay, first.
Actually, I just thought I could clarify that question, but it had already been done, so I'm good. I mean, just that if you have programming skills, you can be working on, tools that can help the testers, or you can be writing automated tests of the code. So that was it.
Yeah, and I may not understand the context of the question, but it would seem to me that automating the tests that can be automated increases testability just by default.
That was the question. If automating tests or checks would increase testability.
Okay. Well, I guess my answer would be yes.
Okay. If we look at the model that we came up with, it might be a part of increasing a part of testability, but the model I try to actually explain here is that it's a more holistic perspective on testability than the software quality characteristic that is very commonly associated with testability. So this is a view that's broader than that specific question. So it might help for some parts, but there is so much more to it than just a single change in the product or adding an automated suite or whatever you want.
All right, we have another yellow card, and then we'll go ahead and move on after that to get to the other questions.
So, loving, I don't know if that's the right way, loving the breadth of how you're talking about testability and trying to look at it from lots of different directions. It seems like that question is about intrinsic in particular, which is a great aspect to look at. On that level, I've certainly had success on my team. We've actually taken code where we saw the developers had a very low unit test coverage and looking into it and saying, oh God, yeah, this code is really hard to unit test because of the way it's written, and actually had engineers on my team refactor that code so that the production code was more testable, adding testability in. We wrote a few unit tests, but mostly what we were doing was saying, here, we're giving you back code that's actually structured in a way that's not painful to write low-level test automation for, which I think is, again, there's many aspects to look at, but that's one interesting thing to look at for teams that have that capability.
I think it's very interesting, but I want to also share an experience where we were developing a product where we actually didn't know what the use of the product was. So, of course, you could automate some checks, but if you don't know what the product is supposed to be used for, there's another part of testability that is low. So even if you would increase the testability in that specific intrinsic part, there are other areas. So in our case, for this one, it wouldn't really help because we didn't know what it was supposed to be used for. And maybe if we did automate some of the checks for specific functions, it wouldn't really increase testability in that sense. So that's one example where you have different dimensions that actually affects testability.
Okay, next is 081. Awesome. And then on deck is 194.
Hi. First of all, I think that's where, this is not my question, but I did want to say that I think it's really interesting to think of testability as including the tester's understanding of the way that the product's usefulness in the marketplace or something, right? Like I have never considered that as part of the testability, but that's interesting. The question that I had was...
Hey, can you stand while you ask your question?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the question that I had was, you mentioned something about how that some things made it onto the product backlog based on this analysis that you had done. I think it was during the earlier phases of your, like when you're using the heuristic testing their testability model or whatever. So what are some examples of backlog items that would come out of an analysis of testability?
Oh, there were so many things. Some of them I've already mentioned. There were very, very unclear requirements, for example, which kind of affects the testability of the product. If you're uncertain of how it should work, that might affect the testability. In many cases, even though we had quite close connections to our customers, many of the testers had never been into the field. They had no idea how the product was used. But at one point, they were actually introduced to how the product was working in the field, and it changed their perspective completely on how they were testing it before. This is maybe rather something that is about perceived testability, which is something I did not talk about. But perceived testability is where you think you do have testability, but once they were exposed to how the product was actually used, they realized, wow, the way we've been testing it has been completely wrong. And in that sense, they had a low testability, but once they got to know the customers and see how they used it, it increased their awareness. And in James' model, that would be the value-related testability. So those were a few of the things that we identified.
Hi, this is DS. First, I have an info to share, then a question. At one point, you were telling that you are trying to Google for testability. But that's, instead of Googling for testability, we should Google for development options. For instance, you have a lot of developer tools that helps with a lot of testability. At least in mobile context, you have something called developer options in Android. That helps a lot for, it helps with a lot of testability thing. SDKs have a lot of tools. So if you search for testability, I doubt you will find good results. But maybe you have to look for a lot of developer tools, so that will help in testability. And the question is, like, in the model, I didn't see any developer in it, even though there is a node called dependent team. But I believe, in my personal experience, when I was testing an ebook reader, we need to check for the load time. So we talk to the developer and get a timer within the app. So I think developers are very critical to get the testability right. So I just want to know, like, where you fit in the developer in the model.
So, okay, there were many things. So for the first part, where Googling for or searching for testability on the internet, I mean, I did find a lot of things about testability, but not on the holistic approach, the one that I was really intrigued about. So there are many, many things about testability. And of course, yeah, there are things that might help you, tools that can help you to increase the intrinsic testability, the actual product itself. But I was specifically interested in this holistic perspective, when I couldn't find anything about that. So if someone like you or someone more have things to share, I would be happy to if you could share that. On the second one, about developers, as I see it, this is a model which applies to software development. So testability is not only about testers. Everyone can help to increase testability, specifically in this holistic perspective. If you look at the intrinsic testability, I think we can take a lot of help of developers. And that is also the part where developers mostly think about, at least in my experience, that if we talk about testability, testability to them is not at all the same as testability to me. So if they think the product is testable, it might mean something completely different. They might mean that they have created a test harness or kind of a stub that you can use while testing, but I might mean that I need the build more often, or it could be a lot of different things that we mean when we say testability. And I have the most interesting things is actually when developers have been part of the workshop, because they have brought in dimensions and they have actually realized that we see testability a lot different, and that there are so many things that they can help out with. For example, my husband has had a revelation of things that he can help testers with now that he's understood the model differently. So developers are definitely a part of the model.
We have a yellow card, 053.
Just to add to the conversation going on in terms of dimensions in your model, based on my experience, I've seen skills of testers affecting testability too in a weird way. In the sense, say for example, you're testing a really complex software. Probably an experienced tester who has done API testing or complex testing, he would be able to better test the system than a person who just joined. So talking about skills, have you thought about adding that to your dimension, or what do you think about that? It's kind of related to the same topic as what dimensions in your model. So
it's added in the sense that it's part of the tester. It's the skills and the knowledge, I would say, is intrinsic kind of to the tester. So it's very tightly connected. So I wouldn't like to put that as a separate part. That is something that at least Ben and I see in the dimensions of testability as a part of the tester himself. Does that answer your question?
Kind of, but just something to consider when you talk about this model, because I think skills of testers or developers affect the testability of system in the way which I just mentioned, because I've seen that in my experience in projects where even though the system was testable, the tester or the developer couldn't do stuff because of lack of knowledge or skills. So that could have a considerable effect when talking about testability. So that's why I just want to know whether you consider it, but if not, that's something to think about, because in my experience I've seen things happening. So, but yeah, that's we can have more conversations regarding that, but I was just curious. So thanks.
Okay, we have something from the tweet printer. Maria, could you tell us how testabilities could change during different project phases?
How testability changes through different
throughout the phases of the project.
So did this come through Twitter?
Yes.
Because I would like to know actually what the person
More
meant
about
by
the context.
phases. But might be difficult to get on Twitter. I think if you are aware of testability, even if we don't have phases, or if we do have specific phases, but if you're aware of testability, for example, if you focus on the information flow so that it's easy for people that need to test to retrieve the information that they need, that could be a part that could be introduced. I mean, at any time. You don't actually need the product to be developed before introducing that part of testability. So I would say that you can increase testability as soon as you've thought of a product.
Okay, next we have 012 and then 145 is on deck. 012, where are you?
This is like a follow-up in one of the other...
Stand up.
Sorry. This is like a follow-up in one of the other questions, but I just need clarification. So in your learnings, how did your team incorporate development work for testability into the existing development cycle?
Sorry, could you repeat the middle part? How did they
incorporate the development work for testability, so specifically for intrinsic testability, in their current development cycle?
So it really depended on the type of issue. The developers or the testers were each part of different development teams. It was kind of an agile development paradigm, but so it really depended on the team and the issues that they have. Each team had their own culture, actually, and processes. For example, if like George, who identified that he needed a specific log to increase his testability, he just asked them and they put that as a part of their backlog. It was very, very different. Another team I had a workshop with, the entire development team, and they identified a lot of different things that they could do, but in the end, they still just wanted another tester. So they put the things on their backlog, but I don't think they got prioritized.
I also just wanted to mention we're now officially in open season time when we have a little more than 15 minutes left. Okay, and 145?
Hi, so my question was just about what was the level of communication like between your test team, even within your test team, and with your test team and the other disciplines that they needed to rely on, like the testers, the operations, things like that? Because some of the issues that you mentioned that they were having seem like they should have been talked about between the tester and the developer, for instance, earlier than they were possibly happening. So just what was the general communication like at that point?
Like I said before, the teams were very different and they had different culture and history together. Some teams changed team workers quite often. Some teams had more permanent people working at the team. So there were some teams that have more difficulties than others to actually express their problems. The ones that I've highlighted are the ones that were the most frustrated. They literally came screaming to me. So, I mean, those are the ones that I've shared. So, what I think was that many times when they did highlight some of the things, it just wasn't prioritized by the product owner. There were always features that were more important than perhaps a testability issue. But it really, really did depend on the specific team, how much help they got. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to go to Alex for another question from Twitter.
All right. Let's see. Best response to managers that say test features like logs would be nice, but what about the schedule?
Sorry.
Basically, we can't fit it into the schedule. What's your best response to a manager saying test features like logs would be nice, but what about the schedule?
The schedule?
Yeah.
The schedule for, yeah, that's a very typical project-related testability issue. The schedule, the time that you get to test. So, yes, it's a testability problem as well, and you might be able to increase it if you have a dialogue, maybe like you said, with people, the product owners, or someone, some project manager. Or it might be one of those things that is beyond your ability, I mean, to affect.
Do we have time for another Twitter one?
Yeah, I think definitely.
All right, awesome. So we have a question that says, what is the difference between James Bach's model of testability and the one you and Ben Kelly developed?
Yeah. If you look at the different models and how they are visualized, that's the first difference. Personally, I would say I'm very biased by James's model. So when we started to discuss this, I really couldn't unthink what I've already read. But I would say the similarity is that they both have a holistic perspective. The difference is how it's visualized, basically. Some of the things we've also left out in our model, for example, epistemic testability is something we have not really mentioned or looked at, and some of the parts are actually put together. For example, if we look on, so if we look, for example, on the product, that is some different parts where there's a fly here. And James's model puts project value-related testability and intrinsic testability as two different things, where we have actually that as a part of the product. And this is my view of it. I'm not sure Ben agrees, and if he's online, he can
He is online, actually. I do have a tweet from Mr. Benjamin Kelly, who did issue a clarifier regarding skills in the model. He says that tester refers to anyone performing testing, not necessarily a test specialist. That's all he says. There's no question.
Hi, Maria. You posed the question, what we can all do to influence testability, but in your model you also mentioned things like testers' skills and knowledge, physical and mental states, as well as product visions. So my question is, to those who may not be in a managerial position, what is your advice on influencing things that go to these dimensions, such as low-performing coworkers or unrealistic product vision, things that may appear out of our control? What's your advice on what we can do personally to increase the testability in these dimensions without running afoul of HR or the legal department?
I think that's a difficult question, because yes, if you, for example, look at the part where we have the tester and we look at skills and knowledge, and of course you might not always have the skills and knowledge that you need for testing. I think at least you can point it out. You can always point out things in a nice way. You don't have to be mean or rude when you point out that some skills might be missing, or that you might need to improve some parts. And I think we've heard a lot of different good presentations today on how you can improve yourself, and perhaps you can share that with people you identify that needs to improve their skills, for example. When it comes to management, it's always very difficult. For example, I don't think I succeeded in working and visualizing testability to my manager. I think I needed a lot more time, actually, to do that. It's like Gary started to work with his managers a lot earlier than before. I mean, before the problems or the things that you wanted to address. In my situation, I couldn't, because I got my new boss started in April, so I didn't have a lot of time before actually leaving the company to work with him.
Next question is one.
Wait, we have one more thing on thread.
One group that you might want to enlist the help from is prod support. I'm thinking things like logs, because whatever testers use for logs, chances are prod support can use those too. And sometimes if you have that alliance, you can make a much more compelling case for getting that item off the backlog and actually into a sprint.
All right, thanks. And we'll have 129.
I was just wondering, in the product dimensions of testability here, you said earlier that the team loop in there was up for debate. Can you tell us a little more about that, please?
We've discussed whether the team should be part of the product. The pro product is because the team kind of works and with the product daily and are part of developing it. But also if you look at the skills or the knowledge or perhaps the relations you might have as a team with your stakeholders or other people that affects the product, that might more be a context driver in that sense if you look into relationships with others. So, but I think the main purpose is to actually show that there are different parameters that affect testability. So in that sense, it doesn't really matter whether it belongs in the team or in context drivers.
Okay, we got another question from Twitter. Sounds like it's related to an earlier question. Have you tried to visualize product testability using mind map or other types of options to communicate it to the team?
No, I haven't. I would like to. I've actually seen some models when we were discussing it. I actually think Rob Saborin has a model, and I also have seen that Adam Knight has a model called SOX, which is focused on the product itself.
I'm laughing at Twitter now. Do we have another thread in the room, or do we want to stick with Twitter?
We have one more in the room. Could we do that and then go back?
Of course we can.
Awesome.
Go for it.
Okay, and 145.
So my question now is, how do you factor in something like culture, the company culture, into your model? You have relationships up there. You have physical and mental state. They can both be fine, but overall company culture can still be crap. How do you factor that into the model?
I don't think we've explicitly added that in our company, but we've talked about it, where the culture is, very important, of course. And that might affect testability. So, no, we haven't really added it specifically to the model, unless it's part of any of the 4 context drivers. But if we add it, it would be part of the context drivers, I would say.
We have about 5 minutes left. Dee, do you have one from Twitter?
I have another tweet for us. Let me start over. What kind of heuristics, besides frustration, have you used to pinpoint potential testability issues? And then it says, curious about more examples.
I'm not really sure what it's called in English. When you're not like able to do anything, like agnostic, or no. I'm not sure of the word in English actually, but you're totally, you've given up completely.
Could be futile.
Sorry?
We have exasperated.
Yeah, that might be the word.
Okay.
So either frustrated or completely given up, basically.
All right, we've got 137.
Hi, I was wondering, you said sometimes there are dimensions of testability that are in conflict with one another. Are there two or pairs or triples that you find that are often in conflict with each other? And could you give examples if there are ones that are often at odds with one another?
Not that I've really thought about. I'm sorry, but it was a very good question, so I would like to see if we could discuss that later.
Okay.
Okay, and our final question is 036. Oh, and it looks like we may have one from Twitter as well.
Another thing I thought about in this dimensions, what about product documentation? Is that considered part of the product? Because a lot of times the documentation I found makes a big difference in how testable the product is.
Yes, that's a part that we added in product, and we've actually added that under product vision, where we talked about different requirement documentations or different visions that you have, and depending on how they are written and affects the testability. So yes.
All right, the Twitters provide. What do you suggest a tester do if an area of testability is lacking but belongs to another subservice or team?
If an area is lacking?
Of an area of testability is lacking, but it belongs to another team.
Oh, that's a difficult one. I mean, even when it comes to testability, I'm not sure there is any ownership of it. I think that's a common ownership. That's why I wanted to stress that it involves everyone in software development. I think I need to have a very specific example, and I don't have one currently. So it depends on the problem, I would say.
Okay. Okay, we have 2 minutes left. Anyone other questions in the room?
Well, you had a green card right up here.
Yeah, just looking at your model there, is that based on your organization and some of the organizations you've worked with? Because in our organization, the team is the business analyst, the tester, and the developers, and we basically all sit in the same, scrum room, and we're all the team that does the product.
Mm-hmm. We want to, yes, it kind of reflects our experiences. And in our experience, the tester is also part of either a Scrum team or a development team. But since we find that the tester is so essential to testability, that's why we wanted to highlight it. And I know that the model might actually be misunderstood because of having tester as a separate part of the diagram. But in this sense, like Ben wanted to clarify, the tester is anyone who is actually performing testing. So it could be any of the developers or people in your team.
Okay, well, I think that concludes our session. Thank you, Maria. That was wonderful.
Thank you.